Hello, everybody. Welcome back to In the Chute. I'm Brandon. He's Kalen. You can't tell which one of us is older because I look so dang good. Kalen, what do you got for us today to stump the chump? What is it?
I am so sorry if I broke somebody's eardrums on that one. This is one of the few times where I have not stumped the chump because I had to do a prequel questionnaire to say, "Hey, do you think it's going to last long enough?" And he goes, "Oh, most definitely." The question is, what is the difference between cattlemen versus sheepherders? Now, oftentimes you might hear me saying something to the effect of, "Oh, there's a bunch of prairie maggots right there." What's a prairie maggot? That would be a sheep. Why? Because it looks like a maggot on the prairie. They're just large, white, and fluffy. So with that, I hope that kind of gives you a perspective of where we come from. And now off to Dad.
Well, those prairie maggots are eating grass that's meant for cows.
Yeah.
So there's that. Oh God, there is so much. I mean, there's literally, wars.
Yep.
Some of
There's
the
history.
yeah, there's a ton of history there about grazing and squatting. Some of the cattle barons, particularly in the Wyoming area, the Johnson County War, partly over a lot over that. There's a lot of sheep history that I flat don't know because it's just not part of what I just know.
Well,
And
and
in
if I
fact,
were to guess, honestly, most sheep herders are typically um they're more of English or kind of that, I guess, Western European background.
well,
and
sure,
and when current Americans came over, they kind of, I think to an extent, they kind of pushed that away, and they started going towards cattle, because I think it was maybe like driving on the right side of the road versus the left side. It was an easier way to say, I don't want to be part of that culture anymore. I don't know, but I just see it very
yeah.
much more of an English type culture that is no longer, it's no longer tied to American as much as it used to be.
Well, I don't know that there was we were so anti-England,
Mm.
uh, during even the colonial days, obviously, because we drive on the right, they drive on the left. Our horse races, we take left turns, they do right turns. There's a lot of things that we did that were thumbing our nose at the king,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why they were done. But when you have an animal like that, for a sustainable farm, and they were small farms at the time, very small, um, you wouldn't probably do that because it's not really going to help you survive by saying no. I'm not going to have those, and the products that come off of them. You got an animal that um, you don't have to put a lot of grass into them to get them to butcher weight. I mean, you got an entire industry that we still use, the wool industry. There's still a lot of clothes, a lot of things made out of wool, and it's necessary. So, just those two things alone, plus most of the time you get two crops of, you get twins out of a ewe. So, you get three crops off of an animal that normally with a cow you get one, and you got to put a lot more into them to get more out of them. Obviously, I mean
Well, and
larger, but
even with that, we people could say, well, you still get leather and you get the byproducts, but really that still requires butchering that animal too. So
right.
let's say we argue that you still get only two crops, but then at the end of that second crop is the animal itself. So it's not really where it's that beneficial, because if you were to do a sheep like what you're saying, then in that case you go from three crops to four, because then you go the wool, the twins, and the animal itself. So four versus two, like there
Right.
is, to an extent, there's a lot of efficiency with the sheep.
Yeah, and I don't know really what people do with older sheep. Mutton is not,
Mm-mm.
yeah, but somebody who knows how to cook it well
Yeah.
is good. But it's usually lamb that is sold, slaughter lamb. So having that change, I mean, this was big area out here, and cattle drives come from the south using the ground. I mean, there was a huge vision there of, man, if I can grab 100,000 acres and hang on to it and graze cattle, and we can, ship them, take them to Chicago or Kansas City, these rail yards, then, it's multi-millionaires at the
But
time.
the
But
big but there is a lot of that was what kind of cattle. Like, here's
right,
my history coming out. The cattle that came from the south upward were oftentimes Texas Longhorn. What's Texas Longhorn not good at adjusting to? The cold.
heat. Yep.
The cold.
They're great. They're great in hot weather. Well, it's the two different types. There's Bos Indicus and Bos Taurus. We have the Bos Taurus. Those Bos Indicus cattle they're warm weather cattle. They're efficient. They can live off of almost nothing and fresh air, but they don't put on the weight that we do. But that's what they had. So there's been an evolution in that as well. I mean, we could probably do an entire episode, I'm sure we could, on that, of which I don't know near enough about, honestly, historically. But sheep were a big part of the West, and we don't like to admit that. Hell, we had sheep on this place when my great grandpa homesteaded this.
This is news to me. I did not know this.
Yeah, look at that face. They had, I mean, that's what they had was sheep here, and because it made them money when nothing else would, it would make them money if you can keep the damn things alive.
Yeah.
That's the problem. I mean, you got predation. They're born trying to die. I mean, everybody says that, and it's true. It's like, God, try to keep a lamb alive, but once it's up, it's generally okay, but you got to protect it a little bit. And that should tell you something about a species that has twins. What is the natural loss when a ewe has twins or triplets? It's high loss because they're having a lot of them.
So that's another question too, though, is, to an extent, cows will be aggressive and they will protect their calves. Are sheep not the same? Do they just kind of be like, oh, meh, it's a loss, meh, and move on? Or like, what's going on there?
They're more like, coyote, I'll tip over myself. I mean, so like those fainting goats almost.
Is that it though? Like, they're just not as aggressive and they just kind of accept it for what it is.
I think but you can have sheep do some things that a cow won't do, where it would be very handy to have them. And a part of that is some of your invasive species of grasses, weeds. Man, they'll go through there, and the right time they'll eat those things up. You just let them go through there, and they'll selectively pick that stuff because it's palatable to them. And over time, you can greatly reduce invasive species with them. Good tool. I mean, yeah, why wouldn't you want a good weed eater like that? But they are high maintenance, super high maintenance. I'm not wild about sheep and handling sheep, the ticks, and I just never wanted to quite do that. I had to play with some sheep when your grandmother decided that she was going to graze some areas and make $1 million on, I don't know, it was like 6 head of sheep or some stupid thing. And it was like, oh my God, I was against it from the beginning. And I looked at Dad and I'm like, are you kidding me? I was in high school. I'm like, really? I'm not stupid. I know who's going to be taking care of these stupid sheep, and it's not my mother. And I was right. I was a damn visionary.
So what's harder to deal with then? Because obviously we've always dealt with cattle, but what's harder to deal with, hogs or sheep?
Well, hogs, you got to contain those. You really should contain them. But hogs are high maintenance as well initially, because it takes concrete and steel to really hold a hog. Otherwise, you're going to be, they'll chew through wood. They eat, wood panels. So those are the things that it really takes to keep them in and confined. But sheep, they're a whole lot easier to handle than cattle. I mean, you can literally pick a sheep up and move them if you need to. You're not going to do that with a cow, right? I mean, and they're not going to hurt you.
Well, and same with cattle dogs too. I've seen cattle dogs like run over the backs of sheep if they're going like up a alley. Weird enough as it is, you can look this up on other YouTube channels if people so desire. But the cows will, or the dogs will jump up on top of the sheep, run across their backs to the back of the alleyway, and push them up the chute. And then they'll do it to the next crop. They'll jump on their backs, go all the way to the back, and then push them all the way up.
Because those sheep they just crowd up. Yeah. You heard the term, people are like a bunch of sheep. That's what it is. One moves and then they finally will all go.
Yeah.
So it's a definitely it's behavior herding. They're completely different than cows, yet somewhat similar. I mean, animals are animals, so they're definitely a little bit lower. They're not an apex predator. Let's put it that way. They're lucky to stay alive. They're the dumbest animal in the world when you want them to not be dumb. So, there's some issues there with sheep with me. I mean, I just don't care for them. I'm glad we got them because I like to have some wool clothing. We don't eat a lot of sheep, a lot of lamb, just don't do it. I mean,
pretty greasy, honestly.
Yeah,
I mean,
well,
it is good, but it's rich and greasy.
yeah, but I've had lamb that's been phenomenal, really good.
No, I
But
agree. I just think it's so, to me at least, it's so oily that sometimes my
Yeah.
stomach it gets sick, and I have a bunch of
Yeah.
Tums, handful of Tums.
Well, and there's people, rack of lamb is really, really good.
Yeah.
It's but it's that we've maybe talked about this before when we went to Disney World. Your mother loves Disney, so we went to Disney World. You went with us, and grandpa and grandma and aunt and uncle. It was Epcot Center, and it was what, Foods of the World or something, or Taste of the World or something.
Yeah,
like
I mean,
that.
it's dang it, why am I? It's a food festival, the food and wine
Yeah,
festival, and
there you go,
so
Food and
you
Wine
can
Festival.
you can find drinks, like they'll have each country, they'll have 2 to 3 drinks and 2 to 3 kind of main meals that represent
Yeah.
their nation, and that's what
Yeah,
you get.
and your mother had never had lamb, and so
Yeah.
this is only what, 5-6 years ago we went, I think.
Closer to 8.
Was it? Wow.
think
Okay,
so.
time gets away. So about 2003 or so.
2003? Are you kidding me?
13. Sorry. God. 2013. How's that?
Yeah,
Anyway,
that sounds about right.
God, I'm not even in the right century. And so she went and she goes, I'm gonna have some New Zealand lamb because they had some. And I went, okay.
And I did too, because same thing. Her and I looked at each other like, haven't really had sheep in my life,
Right.
so let's try it.
Well,
This is the
and
great
it's a
opportunity.
great opportunity. Yeah, it's a fantastic. I was eating stuff from countries that I had no idea. It was like,
And if
it
you
was
don't like
fun.
it, you pass it to the next person,
Yeah.
and they're like, I'll take it. Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, it was really, really fun to do that. So she takes it, she goes up, gets her piece of lamb, and I look at that when she brings it back, and she's got this look on her face, and she goes, this tastes like venison that's turned. And I said, let me have a bite of that. I said, I can tell you right now, just looking at what you got there is not lamb.
Yeah.
That rib is way too big.
Looking back at it,
mutton.
though, it was 100% mutton. Yeah.
Yeah, it was mutton.
I've had lamb since then. Lamb is very good. Again, a little oily, but very good. And that was most definitely mutton. And I will not eat mutton.
So that tells you why you don't have a lot of slaughter, or why I say I'm not sure what they do with their slaughter adults. The slaughter ewes, slaughter bucks. I mean, I don't know what they do with that. So, because maybe they burger it, sausage it, that kind of stuff. It would be what it's for. But it was funny to watch that. So, as a meat source, it's there. But what, you get hungry enough, you'll eat anything.
Right. Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
So your question about what's easier to contain, I think it takes a lot of maintenance, and that's why a band of sheep is roughly 1,000 sheep. Some of these big places had, a sheep herder for a band of sheep. And like, I think Charlie Bear, the Bear Ranch that's just up the river from us, at one time, I just heard a statistic about that. I think it's right. He had 300 sheep wagons, and each sheep wagon had a herder. So that's 300,000 head of sheep. That's a lot of sheep, and so that country was full of sheep, made a fortune on a number of different ways, but sheep was a mainstay for, an entire industry. You're talking about the Industrial Revolution. We've talked about that before with what it has done, what it will do. And wool and cotton are two giant commodities, enormous commodities. So, I never wanted to handle sheep because I didn't want my hands to feel that soft with all that lanolin.
And with that, we will put it out to pasture.